Hello, I'm Caroline Searcy, coming to you from Sydney, Australia, and welcome to the second session of the 2021 International Federation of the Aftercare of Racehorses, or IFAR, conference here. This webinar is going to take place over the next hour and a half, and this week we'll be focusing on aftercare for racing administrators and regulators, and we'll have presentations from the three gentlemen and one lady you can see on the screen as well, starting off with Aidan Butler, the Chief Operating Officer of First Racing, a Stronach Group in the US. A very big welcome to you, Aidan.
Good morning, and thank you for having me.
Good to have you along. Also, we'll be joined by Martin Burns, the General Manager of Welfare and Sustainability of New Zealand Thoroughbred Racing. Welcome to you, Martin. Pretty late at night for you over there in New Zealand.
Yeah, just a bit after midnight, but happy to be here. Thank you.
No problems. And Simon Cooper, Weatherby's Director of the General Stud Book. It's great to have you on board as well, Simon.
Thank you, and it's a much more pleasant sort of 1 o'clock in the middle of the day here.
Perfect. And finally, Dr. Anna Smet, the Animal Welfare Manager of Racing and Wagering Western Australia. And big welcome to you, Anna, as well.
Great to be here, Caroline.
All right, there are the people that will be presenting their information. So much work that's been going into the welfare of our thoroughbreds right around the world in this second session of the IFAR conference for 2021. Really looking forward to your contributions about where this whole topic is going on the global stage. It's obviously one of the biggest issues facing the racing and breeding industries right around the world. If you're unfamiliar with IFAR, it works in conjunction with the International Federation of Horse Racing Authorities to inform and educate racing and equestrian communities right around the world about the importance of thoroughbred care and welfare away from racing, as well as promoting the wonderful attributes of this athletic and intelligent breed, obviously aiming to give all thoroughbreds a really happy and productive long life away from the racetrack. Just to recap on last week's session, which was moderated by UK racing broadcaster Nick Luck, aftercare racing's responsibility was the topic of the first session, and started with an introduction by Di Arbuthnot, who's chair of IFAR, mentioning a rise in the demand for the retired racehorse through the COVID pandemic of the past 12 months or so. But I thought her introduction contained a really important line too, that the measure of how you look after the horse is how you look after the retired one. Irish Flat and jumps trainer in Jessica Harrington also talked about her father using thoroughbreds. They might have been racing at the time, but they were also hunting or they were playing polo. So she learnt really early on about the great athletic skill of the thoroughbred. From Herringswell Stable in the US, trainer Graham and Anita Motion, they reflected on the great work that thoroughbreds can do with military veterans who return with post-traumatic stress disorder and other issues, and how wonderful thoroughbreds are doing that work. And they also talked about their retired racehorse in Ichabod Crane, who now excels as a 3-day eventer with Olympic champion Philip Dutton. Nemini Ruth, the racing office manager for the Aga Khan and Secretary General of French aftercare agency Odella des Pistes, talked about the importance of a lengthy convalescence for horses retiring with injuries from the track. And she also made some really interesting comments about the need to educate owners earlier on when they take on a racehorse, rather than confronting them with the costs of gelding, transporting, and all the other associated costs when the horse is no longer capable of earning further income when they do retire. And also UK equestrian coach Yogi Breisner, MBE, mentioned the training methods used on racehorses around the world now that really assist in their retraining. And it's not just racing, but all sports that are now taking particular care of their retired athletes. We'll see, as I said, the presentations from all 4 speakers this evening, and then we'll be holding a Q&A panel. So make sure you have a look at the Q&A button and you can send your questions through to the team. And after we've had the panel discussion following the 4 presentations, we can get to some of the questions from people around the world. All right, let's get on with things. Our first presentation is from Aidan Butler, as I mentioned, the Chief Operating Officer of First Racing in the Stronach Group in the US, a former licensed bookmaker in the UK. Aidan oversees track management and operations at a number of US racecourses, including being responsible for implementing industry-leading health and safety protocols at Santa Anita Park. Big welcome again, and over to you, Aidan.
Thank you so much, Caroline, and good morning, everybody. It's a nice 5 a.m. in California. So if you see the sun come up and I disappear as some sort of a vampire, you'll understand what happened. So I'm Aidan Butler. I'm the Chief Operating Officer of the Stronach Group in First Racing. More importantly, I'm the proud owner of 4 off-the-track thoroughbreds that really make my life far more fulfilling than it ever was. It's a privilege to speak to you all this morning, and a privilege to share my thoughts with you. And most of you are like-minded people, I'm sure. And by like-minded, I mean people who respect the animals. My job gives me a fair amount of responsibility, and I'm responsible for a lot of things, including 5 racetracks. So that's Santa Anita Park, Golden Gate Fields in California, Laurel Park in Pimlico in Maryland, and Gulfstream Park in Florida. I'm also responsible for 2 thoroughbred training centers. That's San Luis Rey in California and Palm Meadows in Florida. So between these locations, I have about 3,000 humans that I have a responsibility to, but more importantly, I have about 7,000 thoroughbreds that I have responsibility to. So if we go to the next slide. So awareness in aftercare, as far as I'm concerned, is twofold. In one area, it's the visibility to the fans who love the sport, so they can see we understand the importance of giving horses every opportunity to have a second life after racing. And in the other area, it's talking to the people inside the industry that we have to make sure that when we stop racing the horses, when the correct time has come, this ensures these horses have the best chance for a great life after the racing days. It's far easier, as we all know, to find a horse a second home if they're sound and healthy. And if they're sound and healthy, then there relies a responsibility with all of us, including primarily the owners of these animals, to make sure they don't become an afterthought after they've stopped racing. Next slide. So how do we create visibility to the fans? We make sure every major event in our world, we have some big events, and make sure every one of these has some form of aftercare visibility. This can be anything from sponsorship of races, presentations on our biggest televised days, and using all of our company assets from a marketing standpoint to keep mentioning aftercare. This gives us a lot of different things, but we believe at First and at the Stronach Group that the more transparent we are with regards to how we consider aftercare and what we do with aftercare, the more confidence the fans and the customers will have in the sport. Next slide. Obviously, all of the aftercare incentives and initiatives cost money. So we have made sure that each of the racing jurisdictions we're in, that's California, Florida, and Maryland, we have some mechanisms, in most cases, multiple mechanisms to generate the revenue needed. And that revenue goes directly into the aftercare system. These can be directly via a contract. Tracks can give donations from wagering terminals. In fact, currently all of our jurisdictions give and have the ability to give a donation from wagering. Everybody who has a winning bet, hopefully that's more than less, they get the ability to give a portion of that back directly. We have charity days. We have lots of different types of charity days. These can be everything from off-track thoroughbred shows through to one we've recently started, which is called Canter for the Cause. And that gives the ability for anybody with a horse to bring their horse to the racetrack and have a jog or a canter round to see what it feels like to be on the big stage. Some states as well, a percentage of the actual purse money and fees from starts go directly into aftercare. Next slide. So where does all the money go from that's generated from the aftercare component of first racing? So in the US, we're blessed to have organizations like CAMA and the TAA. And I'm sure you're all aware of the TAA, Thoroughbred Aftercare Alliance, and it's responsible for the accreditation, oversight, and funding for over 80 aftercare facilities. These facilities specialize in retraining. It's making sure these horses can be anything other than a racehorse, rehoming and finding them their forever homes with people like myself who will love them and really take the time to make these part of the family. Rehoming, that's finding, that's long-term in retirement, and that's finding a place for horses who are done racing. And often we talk about aftercare and adoption, but there's a subsection and a percentage of the horses, they're either too old or not particularly fit enough to now be riding horses or riding ponies. So we have to make sure we take that into account when we're looking for the rehoming. The long-term retirement as well as the rehoming is so key because it really is a commitment. It's not even in some areas like adopting a pet, because these horses live a long, long time, and the commitment you have to show to them is super important. So placing, my favorite one of these is placing horses in equine assisted therapy programs. This is really special because you get to see how horses give so much back to humans. And I've seen so many instances and cases firsthand of people who have really, I guess they've been healed by these animals. And that to me is so special because the horses want nothing back from it. And I think if I ever, not that I ever had any doubt of how important this is, but if I ever did, going and seeing that makes everything worthwhile. These really, truly are the most beautiful animals that you can ever be around. The TAA generates about $3.5 million a year, and that gets distributed through their accredited aftercare. And obviously that's not all of the funding, but that's the funding that they give back to their accredited organizations. And with this sort of a program, it's really important that because we are so lucky to have this, that when we talk about aftercare and finding and rehoming horses, that they go to accredited programs, because there are so many good ones that there's no need for them to go elsewhere. Go to the next slide. So this is, and I can't see the slides, but if this is the one of me looking like a complete dork with Stone, that's my, that is my first off-the-track thoroughbred who was, he was a handful. He was a baby when I got him. He wasn't much of a racehorse, but I guess if eating peppermints was an Olympic sport, he would be right up there with the best of them because he seems to be have a natural affinity for it. I actually got Stone from the Maker's Mark Secretariat Center, which is a TAA accredited aftercare in Kentucky. And I'm really, really, really happy to have him. So other than funding, what are myself and the team going to do to help with aftercare, and particularly the team over at First? The first thing we do is we pay attention to inventory control. With all of the horses and responsibilities that I have, knowing where they are is key, and knowing what's on site at any time is key. And I'll touch on that in a second. The second thing is to make sure that we develop new forms of technology to make that the case and make it easier to do, because it's, as you can imagine, with that sort of a logistical conundrum, you really, really need modern technology to do so. Third, for us, and very importantly, from the kind of responsibilities I've got, is to be just be tough with the rules we have in place. If anybody does anything wrong with a horse, I have no bone in my body that won't make that person responsible and make that person have to deal with the consequences of mistreating a horse or having a horse that doesn't find its way to somewhere that it can basically have a better chance. There is no need and there is no point anymore in people not taking up all of the different offers we have and all the different abilities for aftercare. Fourth thing is the triage program we've created, and I'm fairly proud of this. This is really making sure anything that goes on at the track, we immediately are on it, and that is made possible by basically each track now having a thoroughbred placement liaison. We have a full-time member of staff at each of our racetracks, and they're fully responsible for taking them from racing and helping them find placement. So if we get to the next slide. So I'll go through these. When I say inventory control, and basically I should explain to some of the international people watching that different in America than some countries, almost all of the horses that we have live at the track. So for instance, I'm at Santa Anita Park at the moment. There are 1,850 horses. About 1,000 of them will be flying past me in the next hour. And when you talk about that sheer scale, it's very important to really have an understanding. So most horses, as you're all aware, now have microchips. So that gives us the ability to scan horses once they're on the property. And as like I said, as you can imagine, thousands of horses on the racetrack and on the backside of the racetracks, it can be a real undertaking to track. But it's just as important knowing who's on site as knowing when a horse is actually going to leave the premises. It's at this point, they leave all the time. They go to race at other tracks. Some of ours, some others, they go to the farm for rest. But we have to know, and it's very important and fundamentally important to aftercare to know where the horses are once they've left the track. So historically, this has been done manually, and it's being done with written documentation. I mean, reams and reams of paperwork, which is, just we don't have the ability, and we never had the ability to check in real time what that data was. So unfortunately, if a horse left the track and didn't find its way to the right place, it could be a time lag before we were aware of that. So to deal with this, we're developing a piece of software, and we're actually really quite far along. We're in beta now, and we've called it Racehorse 360. So this will not only give direct access to the racing office to see where the horses are, exactly what stall they're in, when they get on site, how long they've been here. But again, more importantly, we'll be able to see and alert when any of these horses leave the premises, which is really important. So the next slide, I believe this is the next point is the triage program. So when we started building the triage program, we all understood that, retraining and rehoming the horses was super important, and there was a really good set of options. But as we're all aware, some of these horses have maybe suffered an injury and they can't be placed in an aftercare immediately. These horses, now have options at all of our tracks. We've partnered across the country with medical facilities, and should there be a position where the owner or trainer is unable to help with the medical care needed, we have made the commitment to step in financially to give these horses the medical care they need and find the funding one way or another to make sure any of these horses that otherwise may not have had a future now still have every best shot to have a good life. So next slide, sorry. So the last piece of this was when we understood that, all of these things needed for aftercare take resources, we decided to actually employ at each one of our racetracks the thoroughbred placement liaison. And their job really is to always be accessible to the horsemen. They're contactable 24/7. In fact, because of the different time zones we operate in, these people barely get any sleep, but they really do have the pulse of what's going on the race course. They work directly with the TAA and other aftercare associations, and they give us the ability to be on top of things constantly from an aftercare standpoint and be on top of them as they happen, which sometimes timing is key. They also have a second role with being the point person for any of the fundraising initiatives, and most of them have turned out to be far more effective than any of the management we've got. So this role, of all the things we've done, this role has turned out to be one of the most important. So if I could, just put it all down, and that was a rather quick presentation on all the things that we try and do, but if I could boil it down into a few points, inventory control, knowing exactly where these horses are while they're racing and when they finish racing, elimination of the last race mindset, which is key, that, have stopping over these horses, slowing down their training to be able to make sure they can have an easy transition into a second career is key. Having the triage program should horses be injured and making sure those horses if at all possible, have any medical care they need to then get them to be able to be adopted and rehomed, and making sure we change the culture. And the culture really starts at the racetrack, and it's a culture of, elongating the duty of care, not just for the owners, but for the horsemen across the board, and making sure that we're putting all the time and resources we have at first behind them. So thank you all for listening, and I look forward to answering some questions.
Thanks very much for that, Aidan. Certainly plenty of questions I can already think of, so we'll get to them a little bit later on. But as mentioned, people can hit the Q&A button and write down some questions that we will come back to Aidan. But Aidan, that was fantastic, and really hearing some wonderful things, some great insights into the huge work being done in America to safeguard thoroughbreds, of course, both during their racing lives and when exiting a racing stable, and working with trainers, owners, the vets, the aftercare, Thoroughbred Aftercare Alliance, who do an incredible job in America. And it's just such a high care for thoroughbreds, both within and without racing. So really great listening to all of that. There's our first speaker done and dusted. And now time to move on to Martin Burns from New Zealand, a regular attendee of rehoming conferences around the world, and kind of our Australasian cousin, of course, being from New Zealand, just across the Tasman. Martin's done some fantastic work with New Zealand thoroughbred racing regarding the traceability of thoroughbreds, which is obviously so important, as Aidan just touched on as well. He's the General Manager of Welfare and Sustainability with NZTR. Traceability obviously being the end goal. Since 2014, New Zealand's had a rule in place regarding the reporting of the death or the retirement of a thoroughbred. And in fact, the New Zealand standards were adopted just last year by the International Federation of Horse Racing Authorities. So it just shows how highly thought of Martin's work is on a global level. So there's your introduction, Martin. Take it away.
Thanks, Caroline. It's very kind of you. Hello, good morning and afternoon or evening, wherever you are. As Caroline said, my name's Marty Burns. I'm a General Manager at New Zealand Thoroughbred Racing, which I'll refer to as NZTR. And among my responsibilities for NZTR, I've got the privilege of heading up our thoroughbred welfare initiatives. Today, I'll talk through the reasoning and some of the aspects of our welfare program as it relates to traceability, and I think that links to Aidan's term, the inventory control. So just to give you a brief overview of New Zealand, we've won't dwell on this for too long, but we've got, I suppose, a interest in racing is not as strong as it was probably 30 years ago, but it's still, we've got about 5% of the population that follows racing as participants or punters. And it does still make a significant contribution to our economy. A real benefit to us is we've got a strong and broad equestrian community in New Zealand, and off the track thoroughbreds have got a good chance of finding active and well cared for future in a variety of pursuits. So sport horse or polo, hunters, pleasure horses, tourism, or even farm workers. So, but while these favourable conditions are here, we're also keenly aware of the emergence of adverse public perceptions of racing and a risk to racing's social licence. So NZTR's responsibility is to lead in all aspects of racing, and foremost in the welfare of thoroughbreds. The aim is broad and has its foundation on the principle of each horse deserving a good life. Consequently, there are many various initiatives within our overall program that provide opportunity for enhanced welfare at all life stages. Whether people are opposed to or are avid supporters of thoroughbred racing, their expectations of the industry and those that look after our horses is ever increasing, and NZTR accepts this. An area of exposure for thoroughbred racing is ensuring the traceability of individual thoroughbreds as they progress from foaling to death or retirement from racing and breeding. Some may ask, how does a bureaucratic or pedantic record keeping enhance the welfare of a horse? There's a good list of reasons presenting here, which I'll briefly address. As an industry, we often talk of the love of the horse, or how the horse is at the centre of what we do. From an ethical or guardianship perspective, our horses depend on us as we do on them, and that's absolutely how it should be. Further, the integrity of racing is enhanced by the knowledge of ownership and horse location, particularly of young horses from foaling to their commencement in racing. Data leads to knowledge and will enable more effective future welfare initiatives. Importantly, traceability assists in better ensuring the duty of care by the owner or trainer who passes the horse to the care of another person. We benefit from learning the reasons some horses don't commence racing, or about the future careers of our horses, and how to target education to owners of off-the-track thoroughbreds. Finally, we must be accountable and transparent. We need robust data to counter wild claims from anti-racing advocates. At the outset, NZTR recognised these 6 key components in our traceability planning. These are all important and must be planned and followed through. As Caroline said, prior to 2014, NZTR didn't have a death or retirement rule that would support traceability. Once introduced, the requirement wasn't well understood, nor was it much supported, beyond a paper form that needed to be sent to our office for data entry. So levels of compliance were pretty low. Good progress has now been made with online data capture now in place. I'll go on to talk about resourcing, reports and communication, and importantly, the last point, gaining a culture of willing compliance. I'm not speaking to you all from atop the mountain, as we still have some distance to travel until I believe we're where we want and need to be. What we have ticked off, so while a rule's been in place for nearly 7 years, we've only really driven this with resolve since early 2020. As I said, we moved to online returns rather than a reliance on paper forms, with further improvements to come with our pending adoption of the Australian system for registrations in racing. We've introduced a dedicated resource, so we've had one team member who's specifically dedicated to traceability. What we're yet to do, we're yet to complete the analysis and reports upon which robust external communications can be based. And finally, while we have among our participants some very clear-minded adherence to traceability, we also have a long way to go in shifting the overall mindset and attaining a broad culture of compliance. Though still climbing the mountain, this graph demonstrates the progress that's been made so far. In our early years, we averaged about 250 returns a year. In the 2020 calendar year, this was 4,500. As we've focused our work on horses foaled since 2012, there are a large number of these horses still in racing and breeding as well. But nevertheless, we've still got a lot of ground to make up. In the long term, based on our imports and breeding and exports, the figures should eventually level out at about 2,500 a year. So challenges and traceability. I guess I'm just reinforcing some of my earlier points. In addressing the challenges of attaining comprehensive traceability, which I refer to from foaling to their exit from racing and breeding, we must ensure that returns can be made even easier. A few clicks, information entered in an app, supplemented by automated prompts via text or emails where a horse has been inactive in racing or breeding for defined periods. It must retain a staff member who has primary responsibility for traceability. We must build insightful reports, engage researchers, consider surveys to complement traceability data. We must, through our communications, accept and convey accountability, be transparent, thereby ensuring that we are the acknowledged and trusted source of information. Our communication needs to resonate with owners, breeders and trainers so that they understand and appreciate why this is important. Participants' mindsets need to shift from apathy or dissonance to accepted collaboration. I've mentioned communication a number of times. Acknowledging again that we're not quite where we want to be, it's essential that participants are fully updated on at least an annual basis and that we have on hand robust information to respond in a compelling way to queries from media or government. Clearly, robust data is critical, but it's not everything. Stories are also compelling. This is an area where we're really pleased with our progress. As an example, the Wall of Fame is a catalogue of off-the-track owner stories with owner photos and words, and therefore totally authentic. Nearly 100 horses have been collected so far over the 4 months that we've run this, and there's no limits to how many we can collate and display. Most of the horses are far from famous, but it's clear how strong a bond each have with their owners. Each month we select and feature in social media a winner who receives a prize. Look, I invite you to have a look at these. There's some really cool stories, and they're really indicative of life after racing in New Zealand. And we sort of only gained understanding of these particular stories through our data collection and the traceability officer. So I encourage you to be mindful of that opportunity and traceability efforts. Some stories of the versatility of the second careers of our horses are so compelling that we produce video profiles of our equine employees of the month. These real-life stories gain great readership and complement the data and reporting that may lack resonance for many. So we'll just run one of these videos.
LoveRacing.nz's January Employee of the Month brings us to the very special home of Anna Rehab, where we find plenty of off-the-track thoroughbreds doing great things in the community. We speak with Anna to find out more. Well, Anna, we've caught you on a good day because there's a lot going on. Can you tell us what today's all about?
Today is about showcasing our thoroughbreds as therapy horses.
And what inspired you to start such an amazing program?
We had a really talented, lovely horse come out here to retire who, due to hoof issues, could never ever be ridden, but was just too smart to be a paddock horse, you know, wanted to be involved, wanted to be busy, but could just never ever be a riding horse at all, really. So we sort of thought, what else could we do with them? And my mum has been a school teacher for a million years, and her very best friend happens to be a really good therapist. So they got together and they formed a secondary business called Halo that works with children with high and complex learning needs. And they work with our horses, so we're really, really grateful that they can have another job and another life when otherwise they wouldn't be able to have one.
You've got so many wonderful horses here. How many of them are off-the-track thoroughbreds?
All of them, 100% of them are off-the-track thoroughbreds. We're really, really proud.
So what goes into the process of re-educating them to be safe enough for kids to work with?
Yeah, to be honest, it's like 90% taking them off the feed, and then the other 10%, I'd love to say I'm a great trainer, but really it's not. The kids do a lot of work themselves on bringing their energies down and how to handle an animal that will feed off of your nerves, and they do all that work in the barn on the ground before they even meet the horses. So when they meet them, they're calm and they know how to be around them.
And what great qualities do you notice about the thoroughbreds that come here?
That's their work ethic. They want to work, much like any working breed, like a border collie would be to dogs. Once they know they've got a job to do, usually they'll do it 100%. You know, once they've figured out they're here for a purpose, they'll stick through it, and that's really impressive. And their trainability, you know, they're just very easy to train, really smart.
So Riley, how has working with the horses here changed your life?
Kind of in every aspect. I used to have PTSD and I used to be very anxious and stuff because I was going through trauma, and as soon as the day I met C's, everything changed. He just made me so happy.
So why do you think C's has helped you so much?
I think we kind of, when we first met, we were kind of in the same place because he had 2-3 weeks being here. He was kind of new, he didn't know what he was doing, he's very anxious and kind of he didn't quite know why he was here, but I think we found each other and yeah, it just made everything better.
Employee of the Month Brought to you by loveracing.nz, sponsored by FarmSource Cambridge, for all your farming and equine needs.
I hope you enjoyed that video. It's a good demonstration of our horses and how versatile they are and the different benefits they bring all of us. So in summing up, the task of attaining comprehensive traceability is a challenge, but with sustained effort is clearly achievable. Ultimately, our goals are, firstly, to aim to effect a shift in mindset, that trainers and owners are proactive and accurate in the provision of traceability returns. Secondly, that traceability data supports planning and decisions that ensure future successes in aftercare programs. Finally, that we're able to convey the information that ensures ongoing public trust in racing. Apologies, wrong way. There we go. So I'll sign off with a picture of our traceability ambassadors, a couple of handsome Kiwi horses who are back home in New Zealand after their overseas experience racing in Hong Kong, now living and working back at their birthplace at Hyden Park. Thanks for giving me your time. I hope my presentation has been of some benefit. Best wishes in your own efforts in your own countries, and I'm happy to be contacted if I can be of any assistance to you. And I'll hand back to Caroline and our other speakers for the day. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Martin. That was just fantastic. So much information there and a gorgeous video, and really good to see Pinghai Star and Werther there at Hyden Park. I know they wanted Beauty Generation to go back, but he's living out a wonderful life at Living Legends in Melbourne as well. So some great stories from around the world about retired New Zealand racehorses that have found great homes, and also really good to hear those points about making compliance regarding traceability rules as easy as possible to really try and encourage people to do the right thing. So if you have, and the Wall of Fame, that was just gorgeous as well. Really great idea, because so many stories, as we know, of horses being rehomed right around the world. If you have questions, we have a whole swag of them coming in for our speakers too, so we'll get to them a little bit later on, but you can put a question through with the Q&A button on your screen. All right, again, it's my pleasure to welcome our next speaker for the second session of this 2021 IFA conference. Simon Cooper is Weatherby's Director of the General Stud Book, a role he's been in since 2016. Simon, as well as having many other roles, is also a member of the Executive Council of the International Federation of Horse Racing Authorities and Chairman of IFHA's Thoroughbred Breeding Welfare Standards Working Group, also Vice Chairman of the International Stud Book Committee. So a big portfolio of jobs involved for Simon. He'll be speaking further on the all-important topic of the traceability of the thoroughbred right through all stages of their lives. A big welcome again to you, Simon.
Thank you, Caroline, and very pleased to be here. And hopefully what I'll talk about will be effectively complementing what Marty's already talked about. It's the capture of data through technology, and that traceability link, or those data touch points, if you like. And I've called it, do you know where my horse is now? Because this is the question I really get asked most often with my stud book hat on. And it's usually by people who've owned or bred a racehorse and who have no idea what has happened to it after it's raced. And it should be simple to simply look it up. And most of the time I have to say it is. But sometimes the whereabouts of our horses are not known. And in fact, this morning I was on a call with the UK Horse Welfare Board's talking about the aftercare funding review, and which has 7 recommendations, one of which is traceability and data. And it's incredibly important that we maintain that link all the way through a horse's life. Here's a headline, which is a real one. I haven't made it up, and it just shows in this day and age how easy it is perhaps to lose track of a horse, particularly when you have so much information on a horse. And in fact, a quick one on a sort of a Trivial Pursuit question. When the General Stud Book started back in 1793, it required registration of foals, but the compulsory registration of humans wasn't until 1837, 44 years later. So, so we've certainly got enough data. And it's true that the greatest loss, if that's the right word, of horses in terms of that traceability is that point of retirement when they, and both Aidan and Marty have spoken about this. This is when we lose track of those horses. This is the reason why. The biggest problem I have is paper. As an administrator, paper disappears. Paper is not on a database. And this is the problem. So for 250 years, we've been tracking our horses using paper. But this passport in front of you is one that we received. It's of a horse that was born in 2010. And the passport is in the main, the original passport. But there are 3 sections which are fake or tampered with. The front page, and you can see I've listed there on the left-hand side a number of items which somebody who has seen a number of passports should have spotted. Nevertheless, so sections 1 and 2, which is the identity, are fake, and section 9, and I appreciate that a lot of countries don't have, Europe happens to use horse passports, a number of countries use registration certificates, and a number of other means. But while it's paper, it can be faked. And section 9 inside medicinal treatments, which is also where the food chain status is marked, is also fake. So we know from this passport, we know when and where it was born, this horse was born, because he has a record in our database. We have his microchip, we have his markings, we have his DNA, we know when he was born, we know his full pedigree, his location, his keeper, a huge amount of information, when he was vaccinated and where and by whom, and much, much more. We also know that he was racing in 2016 because section 5, in that we both have his race record, and also section 5, which is his vaccination record in the passport, in the European passport, is original, and the vaccine batch number sticker is original. We know he ran 6 times because, as I say, we have his race records. And for the same reason, we know, because we have the original vaccination record, we know he was next vaccinated the following year, so in 2017, in another country. So he's moved countries. But that's where the trail goes cold. Until about 3/4 of the way through last year, we received his passport. It arrived in our office from a slaughterhouse from yet another country, a 3rd country, together with 9 other passports, all of which were either fake or tampered with, some of them extremely badly too. They should have been picked up, but nevertheless. We have no export movements logged on any of the databases of those 3 countries, either exporting or importing. I've also checked with the equestrian database in the 3rd country where the passport was sent from, and he's not on that database. So either the horse didn't travel to that 3rd country at all, or he traveled as a non-racing, non-breeding horse. So there was no export certificate required, no racing clearance notification, and no breeding clearance notification. And importantly, if the horse is being exported for slaughter, usually they don't want that export recorded because they don't want that traceability. So again, as administrator, how do we close that gap? So there are 2 things we know, and I'll just, sorry, gone too far. There are 2 things we know on the about this this horse through the head markings of the original, what we have in our database, and what was subsequently in that passport that was returned to us, as I say, about 3/4 of the way through last year, because those head markings have been changed. So clearly the horse that went with that passport to the slaughterhouse was not the horse the passport was issued to. So this is I've used that as an illustration just to show how difficult it is with paper and with the traditional forms of traceability to make sure we keep absolute tabs on all our horses, whether they're racing, whether they've finished racing and they've retired and they've gone on to another career. This is a life cycle chart, and you can see here that The average racehorse goes through many ownerships, usually in its life, both sometimes before racing, during racing and after racing. And at any stage in that life cycle, there is a chance that the horse will slip through that traceability net. And we breed obviously for competition, not for food. And racehorses generally travel a lot and they live much longer lives than farm animals. So traceability is critical for our horses. This is a list of the points at which we have an opportunity to track our horses. On the left in green are the bits of information, if I can call them that, we capture because they're captured digitally. And importantly, this information, generally speaking, is required for competition and for trade. So if you want to sell your horse or buy a horse, if you want to compete, whether that's in races or in shows or equestrian competitions, generally that information is required. There is a need to have it. The red items on the right are generally captured on paper. There's no permanent record, there's no timestamp, there's no audit trail. I've underlined, you'll see fourth from the bottom there, just vaccinated. Vaccinations are an important part of the information for, excuse me, biosecurity purposes, but they're not captured, generally, they're not captured digitally in most countries. It's usually a sticker in the passport or on another form. If you lose the passport, the entire vaccination record has gone from for that horse. So what is the answer to this problem? Well, first of all, we need to get rid of the paper. Currently, it is a requirement under law for us to issue paper passports. This year, all our foals are being issued with smart cards, which will have effectively the link to their entire database, their file for life, if I can call it that. 3 years ago, I was part of a group who started looking at digitizing all aspects of the thoroughbred's life cycle. And we've now got to the last stage of that process of introducing a number of different digital mechanisms and tools that will eventually replace the paper passport or the registration certificate or whatever you might use for the ID of your horse in your country. And these smart cards are the entry keys to the to the digital passport from conception to death. If I just go on to the next slide, I'll show you the points in red there are effectively the ones that would apply to horses after racing. The digital passport is on a telephone, on a PC, on a tablet. But importantly, what it'll do is it changes behavior. If you give the owners or the trainers or the keepers the right tools, that information will come back to the organization that is issuing the information. So digital passports control the horse's owner's ability to trade and to compete, both, as I say, during its racing career and subsequent careers after retiring from racing. And these are just some of the data points that it captures. The vaccination app we launched last year, an important thing about the vaccination app is that every horse, generally speaking, is vaccinated. So it's an extremely good tool for tracking horses, particularly if they're moving from one country to another. This is probably the best tool at your disposal. And this is incorporated into the e-passport. As I say, it was launched last year. We've got about 40,000 horses, historical and current vaccination records now on the database, and what it does is it stops horses. If, for example, a horse its vaccination is not up to date, the trainer will simply not be able to enter that horse in the race. The red flag will come up in the system. So again, you're controlling that behavior, and it gives the industry, most importantly for me as an administrator, it gives us that traceability, and for regulators too, the ability to prevent unvaccinated horses from traveling, from entering races, and so on and so forth. And then in the Movement app, which again was something we launched actually the year before in 2019. So all movements of breeding stock are currently monitored. So if a mare goes to a stallion or a stallion shuttles or whatever it happens to be, in addition to if it's traveling cross-border, the export certificate or the BCN, this replaces an awful lot of paper forms. And none of these paper forms were previously uploaded to the horse's digital file. So again, I've listed on the right there these data points that provide that traceability, and all of those apply to horses after racing as well as during racing. So what will if I could just wrap up, what will improve traceability of our horses before, during, and importantly, particularly for this webinar, after racing, for the aftercare of these horses, to make sure that our disappearing horse that I referred to earlier, that was born in 2010, doesn't disappear. We know exactly where it is now. We don't just have what remains of his passport, but we have no idea where he is. I think technology is a huge, and as Marty has said already, this is a hugely important part of this traceability that now is available to us, and we can make sure that all of these horses are traced from the cradle to the grave. Secondly, I think education, and I know Aidan has spoken about this and Marty touched on it as well. Education is an incredibly important part of this. Education and communication is an incredibly important part of this. But also, I think regulation plays a part. There should be, and I've listed some of them there, a requirement to notify the organisation that issues that identification certificate or that passport, those events in a horse's life. There should be a requirement that is notified, and it must be notified within a certain relatively short period of time. I've just put some suggested periods in there, but that is, I think, key. Those three elements, I think, are key to ensuring, certainly from an administrator's point of view, that we know exactly where a horse is throughout its entire life. And thank you very much, and look forward to answering any questions on that. Thank you, Caroline.
Thank you very much. Really, really interesting. Such a vital tool with paper so easy to take. So plenty more questions. Really interesting about the vaccination being such a great regarding traceability data you can get from that as well. So thank you very much, Simon Cooper there. As we move on to our final speaker for session 2, Dr. Anna Smet, the Manager of Animal Welfare at Racing and Wagering Western Australia. Just by way of explanation, Australia has a number of different models that deal with the aftercare of thoroughbreds, and they very much vary from state to state in many different ways. The Western Australian model combines some of the best points from some of the other state regulatory bodies, and WA is very proactive about getting programs in place to really assist the state's racing and breeding industry, provide the best care to its thoroughbreds for the whole of their life. Anna's currently heading up also the Off the Track WA Estate Equine Welfare Facility. So big welcome to you, Anna.
Thanks very much, Caroline. Thank you for that lovely introduction. It's an absolute pleasure to be presenting at the conference this year on behalf of Racing and Wagering Western Australia on some of our recent initiatives and advances that we've implemented for thoroughbred aftercare here in Western Australia in the last 18 months. So as part of my role, it's my privilege to oversee these animal welfare initiatives, and including those that address thoroughbred aftercare. So just before I go into these, I'll start by briefly introducing the Western Australian thoroughbred racing industry for a little bit of context. We're not as big as some of the other states in Australia. Racing and Wagering WA, so I'll refer to us as RAWA, is a tri-code racing authority. So we're responsible for administering not only the thoroughbreds, but also harness and greyhound racing in the state. So according to the most recent available data, thoroughbred racing was found to be the third highest attended sport in WA, Western Australia, after the Australian Football League and motor racing. So it is very popular here, although we face many of the challenges that Marty also described in New Zealand. There are a total of 37 thoroughbred race clubs, which you can see on the map there, which are found in all the regions of WA. They stretch as far apart from places like Broome in the far north, all the way down to Esperance in the south, approximately 2,500 kilometres apart. So despite these widely varying locations, if my next animation will pop up, you'll see that most of the horse population is actually based in the Perth metro region. So at the bottom there, that bluer zone and this, that little bit to the left there is where most of the horses are. So the enormity of the distances involved creates some challenges in traceability and the application of any welfare initiatives and any thoroughbred aftercare as well. So there's no doubt that each racing authority across the world has its own challenges in elevating their aftercare program, and distance is just one such example that we see quite vividly here. So before I go into our recent developments, I'll just take a look back at the history here. We'll look at the context of the environment that we found ourselves in approximately 18 months ago. In terms of racehorse aftercare at that time, RAWA had a well-established off-the-track WA program. Off the Track is the brand under which we operate all of our post-racing initiatives, even to this day. And what we're mostly involved in are those things that you can see outlined on the slide, mostly involved in promotions of the versatility of the thoroughbred, sponsorships of horse events, some educational activities as well, and sponsoring of individual riders. So the brand remains the one we operate our post-race initiatives under, and this has been expanded quite significantly. When I say post-racing, this doesn't only refer to the horses that have raced. I'm also including any horses that might not have actually raced, but that are leaving the care of the racing industry anyway. The predominant focus at that time was on influencing the demand for retired racehorses by the very active equestrian community, which in WA over the years has come to see thoroughbreds as a desirable breed of choice. So despite that being what was predominantly focused on, many other areas had been the subject of internal deliberations, debate, a lot of planning, the purpose being to identify strategies and outcomes to achieve some advances, in the first place for the welfare of the racehorses. Then at the end of 2019 in WA, a situation arose where the Australian racing industry was at risk of losing its community acceptance of the sport, when a widely broadcasted expose shared footage of thoroughbred racehorses being mistreated at slaughter establishments. And although we were already progressing many of these developments to our equine welfare strategy to safeguard the welfare of our animals, these plans were fast-tracked. What the result was our WA Racehorse Welfare Plan. So the full scope of this plan can be found online, but in November 2019, RAWA, in conjunction with the then Racing Minister of Western Australia, announced its Racehorse Welfare Plan. It was a 10-point plan prioritising strategies for immediate action in a number of different areas. So they're broadly summarised under 3 areas, which include traceability, rehoming upon leaving the racing industry, and end-of-life outcomes as well. So if we fast forward now to the current time, so fast forward 18 months to where we are at the moment, we are very pleased to have completed many of these actions. And although you can see a lot of these updates online, I'm not going to go into all of them because we'd be here forever, but I will focus on the 3 that I've highlighted there. So the first being the Equine Welfare Facility, the Off the Track WA Retraining Program, and then finally also our WA Racehorse Passport as well. So to dive into these, I'll start with the one that is the most visible in that it is physically present in our lives now. The Off the Track WA Estate is what we've called our Equine Welfare Facility. RAWA went and purchased land for the purpose of benefiting the aftercare and retraining of racehorses. But the purpose here was really, it was threefold. So it wasn't only for the retraining and rehoming, but there was also a strong educational focus. It was important to us that this facility would host clinics and events for Off the Track WA. And it was also important to us for the ability to provide emergency care for WA racehorses should that need arise. So rather than serving as a destination for all retiring racehorses, which as you'll have seen from our map of WA is just not feasible given the scale of the state, it's really a multi-purpose facility. And that's owned by RAWA. So at the moment, that's all been set up, and we have a dedicated live-in facility manager who's responsible for these, for the day-to-day actions. I'll move on swiftly to the off-the-track WA retraining program. So this is the second main development, and this was introduced in September of last year. So it is still very new. And the off-the-track estate is the centerpiece of this retraining program. So the aim of the retraining program, and we get asked this a lot, it's really to complement the already existing pathways for rehoming post-racing. It isn't the intention that every horse comes through this program, but to supplement what there already exists in this space. The second aim here was to provide an alternate option for horses that are not selected by other retrainers or rehomers, or for those that might not be sold or gifted easily directly from racing by their racing connections, particularly for those in remote areas where there might not be the same equestrian community available to support that transition. So what was really important to us in developing this was that we didn't want to intervene with existing mechanisms that already exist, where industry participants have already for a long time very successfully transitioned retiring racehorses into the equestrian world. It was important that we were supplementing what there was, not taking that away from what already existed. So in terms of how it actually works, the off-the-track retraining program, it's open because we're a tri-code. We have it both for thoroughbred and standard bred horses, bred for the purpose of racing, but they can be exiting the racing industry at any stage of their careers. We utilise the off-the-track estate and a network of official retrainers who work to provide these retired racehorses with the skills that they need to transition to their second career as a pleasure or performance horse. And this doesn't exclude those that might not make it as a ridden pursuit. We are open-minded with that, and part of this is being very creative in what the suitability is of horses and assessing them each as individuals and as they come to us. It was initially launched as a pilot program in September, but the hope is that it will grow. But we also wanted to have the room to learn from our experiences. This is a new area. As a racing authority, we're not rehomers ourselves. There's a lot of learning along the way. So the emphasis here as well was on matching suitable rider and horse combinations. So using the expertise available to us to ensure that the matching was done appropriately and consciously, with ongoing coaching support from our retrainers who are very experienced in that area. And finally, of course, for the buyers of the horses, it was really important to us that the welfare of the horses is always considered, and that the positive outcome was one that could be carefully supported through ongoing support, basically, for the buyer, so they have access to different aspects of the off-the-track community for educational materials, access to clinics, as well as coaching vouchers to make sure that they have the support they need. So while as a racing authority, we weren't previously in the business of rehoming horses ourselves, through relying on our experienced retrainers that have been active for many years in WA, we've managed since September to rehome approximately 20 horses now. And at this point, the demand to buy a horse from the program is actually outweighing the horses that we've got passing through. So, which is quite an exciting development. So moving on from the rehoming, the third initiative that I wanted to touch on briefly today is our off-the-track WA passport. Listening to Simon there, we can only dream of a time when in Australia we'll have a unified system for national traceability, but WA has pursued this initiative, which focuses on the traceability of retired racehorses. The public expectation is that there is an understanding of the life of retired racehorses once they leave racing. And so as part of our efforts to support racehorses following retirement and to develop some source to capture that information on ownership and location, we developed our WA Racehorse Passport system. So this isn't compulsory, it's not regulated. This doesn't fall within the racing industry's authority to regulate, but it's a system that aims to keep the retired racehorse ownership and location details up to date. And it does this through incentivization and access to benefits, which we already provide through our Off the Track program. We'd already been working on that previously. So with the move to achieving national traceability of horses progressing very slowly in Australia, this is a racing authority-driven post-racing traceability initiative. It's not a physical passport, not a physical document. It's a digital platform which is very simple, runs through the Off the Track WA website, where owners of the retired racehorse, once it retires from racing, are able to search for their horse in the portal, and following some verification, they can claim ownership of the horse and have their details registered against the horse's name. They then receive exclusive benefits and incentives such as educational materials, access to clinics and events, competitions, and other initiatives as well, which we're constantly still working on expanding. It is voluntary and incentive driven, and the two main purposes here are to help us develop an understanding of life and of the retired racehorses and ownership post-racing, something where we don't have enough data at the moment, and also to help us connect with new owners to provide ongoing support and advice where it's most needed. So just to illustrate what that interface looks like, it's very simple. The owner can just search for their horse, the details will be there. They can then claim ownership of that. There is a manual verification process still involved. And then once that verification is completed, they receive a welcome pack. They do receive a certificate, but that's not supposed to be a proof of ownership. The documentation that we hold in our online system is really what's important to us. So it allows us to capture some more basic information that you can see here as well around the horse's location and ownership. And we continue to add to the functionality of this really quite simple system to gain some information that we can hopefully use to have a better understanding in the future. So this information that we capture is also updated in the National Racing System database, so through Racing Australia, and hopefully one day in the future, when we do have that National Traceability Register, it can be made to interface with that as well. So just an update on where that's at. The passport's been in place for just over 7 months now, and we've had almost 2,000 horses claimed under it, with just under 1,500 of those being thoroughbreds. The rest are standardbreds, of course. And what we found, which we found very interesting, was that owners of retired racehorses are extremely motivated to contribute to better welfare outcomes. For many of them, it wasn't that important to get the benefits, but the fact that they were contributing to a potentially better welfare outcome and that their horse had that safeguard of having an owner listed was actually very motivating. So just in closing, a few remarks on our learnings over the last 18 months, which we'll of course be using to develop our equine welfare strategy into the future. The focus on and the importance of aftercare is ever increasing, and it should cater for racehorses exiting the racing industry at all stages of their lives. Secondly, aftercare programs shouldn't inhibit activity already taking place, and we should be making use of the expertise that already exists. Thirdly, a multifaceted approach is very beneficial in creating broad-reaching benefits for a greater number of horses. Fourth, a racing authority-driven rehoming program can have its challenges, and it can be cost prohibitive, but they can be successful in supplementing the responsible placement of horses. So the responsible rehoming of horses can be supported by mechanisms outside rehoming programs which support retention, and the importance of education is what is extremely important here. So at the end of the day, the horses are really the champions of the sport, and this is what drives the passion for so many in the industry. And just like any athlete, wherever possible, they deserve a rewarding retirement. So it's really important that we are doing everything we can to set them up for success in that life after racing. And then, of course, the important thing as well is to celebrate the small successes, no matter how small they are. So here is just a little slideshow of several that at the time I put the presentation together had been rehomed. It's important to celebrate any small wins because many of them are challenging, and it's really important to recognize that.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Anna. Some really important work going on there in Western Australia, and I'm with you. I can't wait for the national traceability. So your digital passport eventually, hopefully, being extended right around Australia so that we can really, have a whole system in place that's got working. You can send in questions. Of course, we're about to conduct a few questions with our panel, but if you have some questions, just with the Q&A button on your computer on the webinar screen, you can send in some questions. So I'll start with Aidan. I had a couple of questions myself, but I'll go straight to Juliana's question for you, Aidan, saying you have inventory control at track level, but how do you track these horses once they're rehomed and of course beyond?
That's actually a really good question. All of the aftercares, or in fact, all the horses that are passed by aftercare have, and I'll give a perfect example. One of my horses, the one I mentioned earlier, Cannonstone, I basically have to sign documentation that says at any point during the year, the aftercare themselves will check in for updates. I have to sign off that I have full duty of care for that horse. And so after the horses are placed, we have a very robust system in the States to make sure that the new owners, and I'm sure it happens more often than not, are doing absolutely the right thing. And I'm lucky because I've got a bunch of doting fans of the horses I've got, so they all have their own social media accounts. So it's a little easier for the aftercare to check on their progress. But no, we do have quite a robust system for making sure these horses are doing what they said they would be doing.
Oh, good to hear. Martin, in your presentation, you outlined sort of the various elements required to reach higher levels of traceability compliance. The need for a culture of compliance is really interesting, isn't it? We're not there yet, I think, right around the world. It's still something that regulatory bodies are kind of, fighting to get more compliance. How do you actually achieve compliance? I guess we get back to that carrot or stick sort of mentality. Is it trying to, coax people into it or just basically threaten them with penalties?
Yeah, and I think the other part is ease. If we can make it easy for them to, as I say, do a few clicks on an app, share some details of where the horse is moving to, and if they can do that in a couple of minutes, that takes away, I think, the friction that people have with compliance, because if it's easy, why don't you do it? You can do it over a cup of tea. So I think the easier we can make it, the better. We communicate the importance of it to them. I think so we make it easy. Bit of a carrot, a bit of a pat on the back when they do it, but probably there does need to be a stick as well. So but you wouldn't pull that until we've sort of done our best to sort of make it easier for them and to let them know why it's important.
Simon, really interesting, particularly hearing about the digital foal cards that you've brought in this year. That's fantastic too. But, talking about the problem with paper and technology is just a great friend, isn't it, in kind of conducting more effective traceability. Do you think the paper trail is still an impediment to getting that right data on thoroughbreds throughout their lives? I mean, most jurisdictions, I guess, Simon, they're really still working with paper.
Yeah, I agree. Yes, they are. I mean, these paper passports are, they're perishable. There's no audit trail. One of the biggest areas where there's a gap in traceability is that change of ownership. And it was, as I said, and the other speakers mentioned, racehorses are different in that sense, in that they do change ownership can change ownership a number of times. And at the moment, and what Marty's just said is absolutely right, make it easier. So it's carrot and stick. So when they change ownership, they have to send the passport back to us. We have to then change that on the database. We have to verify it. We have to change the ownership in the paper passport, and then it goes back to the owner. So they're without their passport for a week. They have to put it in an envelope. The whole process is archaic, really, when all you actually need to do is pick up your phone and click on your e-passport, and you still, while we still have paper passports, you still have to send your paper passport in because that's required by law. But ultimately, you would do. I mean, change of ownership is just one example, but you can do it on your phone, and as Marty says, you can do it over a cup of tea. More importantly, I think on particularly on the change of ownership, is that certainly in this country we have for whatever reason, it's the person who receives the horse, who's gifted the horse or buys the horse, who does that change of ownership. When we change a car in this country, the buyer and the seller, or the person who's gifting the horse and the person who's receiving the horse, has to fill in forms separately. And when those two match, you have a change of ownership. And that's what we're going to do with the e-passport. And it's so easy. So both parties do that.
Yeah, I know I've had trouble getting foal cards and so forth from horses from trainers when they're leaving the training stables and being retired, etc. It really is quite cumbersome. You're right, tracking those cards down and all that information that's sort of as a hard copy rather than a digital copy. So some really good work though, obviously taking place within Weatherby's and within the UK. And I'm really interested in this whole situation as far as your passport too, because we do have that situation as we both touched on within Australia, with the states having their different models and ways of doing things. I mean, but you're very collaborative. I mean, your model is partly, similar to, I guess, Racing New South Wales with, as you said, the equine facility for retraining and holding clinics and having horses there, but also the Victorian off the track model where you're very much also rewarding retrainers. So there is a level of collaboration, isn't there, within some of the states?
Yes, absolutely. And we've learned a lot from each other, I think, along the journey. In Australia, we've been very fortunate that over the last few years, especially, we have, we get together regularly virtually to discuss progress and to gain from each other's learnings as well, because we're all working on very similar things, albeit in different, it looks slightly different, but we're all working on very similar challenges, and we all have that same that national context of Racing Australia that is the custodian of our racing data and that sort of thing, and many similarities with New Zealand as well. So there's much to be gained from looking at what others are doing, and we have worked on that. But there are some differences which do make it quite challenging, things like the tri-code nature of some states versus others. So for us, for instance, we always have to think about the standard breds as well as the thoroughbreds. Things like that do make it a little more challenging. But I think I don't think anyone has the perfect solution worked out. I think we're all still advancing towards achieving these higher standards and elevating what we're doing. And sometimes you do need to just take the bull by the horns and make some progress towards achieving your strategy. And learn from your learnings along the way, whether that's from your own experiences or from those of the other states.
Indeed. Aidan, an interesting one here that we've had come in from Malaysia, actually, from Finn Powery. I guess it's the issue of the one last race. This will be touched on with Dr. Chris Riggs in the presentation in the final week of these sessions. But the mentality of that one last race, obviously administrators, it's very hard to change the mentality when you're trying to fill race fields and there's almost a push on trainers and owners to run that horse that one last time. How do you sort of get around that and kind of change the mentality for owners and say, look, really, you don't need to do that?
Well, it's a culture shift. And in the past, rightly or wrongly, people have, really used these as commodities, not as animals, and really didn't factor in that, back in the day, just to make it plain and simple, Caroline, there was no accountability if a horse had an injury, even though anybody with any sort of a racing mind could stare at the PPs of that horse and see that the horse was obviously not doing well or was overworked. That isn't the norm anymore. And I can speak firsthand for Santa Anita, where, as you're all aware, we had some really unfortunate incidents in 2019. And now the culture has changed. It's no longer acceptable. And I think with some of the other programs I talk to, even triage, if a horse has an injury, we have a thing now called a trainer review panel, where if a horse has an injury on the track or in training, we will actually sit down with the vets, with the state vets, and talk through exactly what happened. And it's just, it is a culture change, and it's going to take a little time, but there's just no need. There is no need anymore. And it does get my back up a little bit. And this is too kind an audience and too friendly a thing to really get into it. But there is no need anymore. If a horse has passed his racing career, it is our prerogative and our responsibility to stop with these horses. And I'm hoping, just with management, with the culture, and just with the, even the external pressure from the public, things are going to change. And in fact, they have to change.
Absolutely right. And Martin, you mentioned as part of traceability, the education required for people taking an off-the-track thoroughbred. And I know with 3 horses that I bred, and they all came back to me because they weren't able to be looked at by people I unfortunately leased them to. How can the regulatory bodies stretch their reach further to include the equestrian community? And what are our responsibilities to sort of educate them about the very specific needs of the thoroughbred?
Yeah, that's a good question, because there are, whether it's myths or misconceptions about a thoroughbred and what it means compared to a warm blood. And I've had some good discussions about that today with some retrainers in New Zealand. So I think we just need to work on the facts, share the stories about, the versatility of the thoroughbreds. And the more we can demonstrate it, and we do have the means to demonstrate this now through our, videos and other social medias and so on. So we can spread the word in a lot more, there's a lot more compelling and more easily than what we could have, say, 20 years ago, So I think the opportunity's there, but we just need to sort of pick the themes, whether it's, just riding skills or nutrition or what you need to do, and just concentrate on those and just try to sort of reinforce, the abilities that the horses have got.
A question here from Siobhan Griffin for Simon. What sort of obstacles did you have to overcome to implement the e-passport? And when do you perceive that the e-passport will replace the paper passport? What are the legal necessities to sort of, overcome this?
Billy, I would love to see the paper passport disappear this year, but that's not going to happen. It's part of EU legislation, and I know, Britain's left Europe, but nevertheless we abide by all the European legislation. So for Europeans, the paper passport is here for the time being. However, the new animal health law, which comes in on the 21st of April, so next week, does include clauses allowing for last minute, but not too late, allowing for smart cards and smartphones to be used. But nevertheless, we still have to produce the paper passport. In terms of the obstacles, not really any major obstacles. It's been a 4-year journey to get to this point. We've done it in sort of bite-sized chunks all the way through. But yes, the legislation is starting to catch up. I guess that's the biggest barrier. And I think with all transitions, it will take time, because it's not going to be a revolution. It's going to be an evolution. And I think, countries will adopt technology at different stages. And it will take time. But I think when we travel, there's heady days when we used to travel. We don't use bits of paper anymore. We use our telephone, and it's no different for horses. It shouldn't be any different for horses. In fact, for a number of reasons, our technology really should be better for horses. So I think that transition is going to speed up over the next couple of years.
Oh, good to hear. That is great. Anna, you mentioned sponsoring shows, for people that have taken on thoroughbreds, and, a lot of regulatory bodies in Australia do this, and private organisations in the UK, of course, ROR does a fantastic job. The American Thoroughbred Makeover Symposium that I've attended in the past is just incredible what they do with the huge prize money in Kentucky. But, we can't, I guess, expect the equestrian world to take all our thoroughbreds without the racing industry kind of contributing in some way to encourage that.
Well, I suppose the sponsorship does show to some extent that it's been very successful in changing people's understanding of what the retired thoroughbred can be, what they can do, and some form of incentivization, I suppose. But I think what we've seen is that people have gotten really addicted to the breed, even if they might have had some other reason for taking on their first thoroughbred. The sponsorship component is really important, but I think more important than that is also the education component. So making sure that not only is it is the prize money boosted, or you get a little bit of extra if you're competing with a thoroughbred. I think equally important, or even more so, are those opportunities to participate in the equestrian community, regardless of the level, to make sure that everyone who takes on a thoroughbred is able to take that horse somewhere, even if they're a little bit nervous, even if they're not quite sure about how they're going to behave the first time out. That is equally important. And I do think there is some responsibility there for programs like Off the Track in making sure that these opportunities exist so that new owners can have those really positive experiences and not be left with questions that they might not quite know where to turn to, or the welfare of the horse is always the priority, and it can happen very quickly that uncertainty leads to an incident, leads to a lack of confidence, and leads to a horse that's left in the paddock with very little done with it. So it's really important to be there at that initial transition stage with all the education that is possible, whether that is in person through clinics or through some other method as well.
Aidan, Kristen Bentley sent in a question for you saying, do you work with or recommend working with individuals outside TEAA accredited facilities to rehome or network horses? Why or why not? Obviously Thoroughbred Aftercare Alliance does an incredible job, but are there other sort of networks that you could use as well?
There are, yeah. And in fact, the TAA is one of them. In California, we have a great organization called CARMA, which is for California specifically. And there are so many independent aftercares that do a great job. Unfortunately for us, and from the track standpoint, anything we do and anything we commit to needs that extra level of, I'd say, compliance, and that extra level of, I guess, Big Brother watching a little bit, because if things go wrong, it's such a lot of time and effort to make sure that we can rehome these horses. And it would be and it can be heartbreaking if the horses leave the track intended to go to the right place and don't. So we tend to stick with the accredited aftercares, but I can give an example of lots of very dedicated individuals who have made it their life's work, and they should be commended, not only rehoming these horses, but actually going out into the wild and getting them back should they end up in the wrong place. And those people, especially the ones I know who they are, and I can't send enough love to them.
And Martin, I guess obviously your traceability that you've set up, particularly since 2014, that there's a lot of collaboration is there around the world. We can see with conferences such as this. But do you communicate much with other people around the world, or do you get a lot of people communicating with you about what you're doing? There seems to be a lot of sort of discussion about the different models and every little step forward from around the globe.
Yeah. Well, we do, and Anna touched on it earlier. There's Anna, myself, and our colleagues in equivalent roles across the states of Australia get together about once a month, and we share ideas and special topics and pick up on each other's initiatives and circulate papers and anything that we can do to sort of make each other's lives easier and gain some inspiration. So that's really valuable time for us. And when you add to that, IFAR as an organisation, so that's obviously why we're here now and learning from each other again. And these forums not only share ideas, but we're building networks. And I think the more we leverage off each other, better for all of us.
Indeed. Simon, a question from Juliana Waugh. Does the smart card or the e-passport info connect to the CED in the UK after a horse retires?
Absolutely. We are required to update the central equine database. And again, different countries have different structures around this, but within Europe, it's the legislation requires a central equine database. Interestingly, again, this is a particular problem for perhaps thoroughbreds, but initially horses, there is within the Ministry of Agriculture within this country a livestock information system or program, but it excluded horses. And the reason originally was because horses are quite troublesome in the sense that they live a long time and they have a lot of different owners and they go to the races and they don't have and usually they return to where they started from, whereas most farm animals don't. So it was considered too complicated. And in fact, we've just released equine premises numbers for all breeding stock in this country, again, because we were excluded initially because horses are difficult in that sense. So as administrators, we have even more responsibility to put in place those links, if you like, between the government and the industry.
Anna, just one last question here. You mentioned, of course, the size of Western Australia, the locations. There was a map of the locations thoroughbreds are spread across, and I know. Even speaking to a leading trainer in Sydney and Chris Waller, it's not when the horses leave the major stables in the cities that's often the problem, because they can go somewhere further out. But, when they're out in some of these smaller communities, that there aren't the equestrian, support bases or the number of riders to take them on when they do retire. What's the work that you do to try and help those horses that are out in some of those far-flung communities?
That's a very important question, and that was a lot of our thinking around the retraining program was how can we make that more accessible to horses that might be retiring in those areas. In the months that we've been active with that, we've done regional awareness and applications drives. Basically what it means is our off-the-track staff has targeted race clubs just prior to the end of season, and so they'll do some desktop-based research on the populations that are active there and any that are likely to retire. And then come the end of season, they've actually travelled out there to make sure that they're on hand to help trainers with advice on what retirement options there are for horses, and to facilitate the process of application to the retraining program should they not have any other options available to them. So that means that they've facilitated the vet check, they'll organise the transport, which is heavily subsidised by us. Because in some cases, it's really a matter of making sure those horses do come back to the Perth metro area where that equestrian community does exist and where there are those homes to be found. So in those situations, the transport's heavily subsidised by RAWA, and we found the uptake to be very good for that as well, and just the awareness as well and the opportunity to share that information of the options available has been really beneficial. So that's something that we really want to continue doing into the future to make sure that we're there where it's needed, not just doing something that the industry would have been doing for themselves anyway.
Very good points. All right, well, we did have a lot more questions, but we have run out of time for this second session here of the IFAR Conference of 2021. Thank you all for taking part. Aidan Butler, of course, giving us a great insight into the work being done on thoroughbred welfare, both within racing and as the horses exit the training barns at major racetracks in the US. Thanks so much, Aidan.
Thank you so much, Nara. It was a real pleasure to meet you all.
And you indeed. And Martin Burns, well done with the world-leading traceability work you're conducting there in New Zealand. Thanks for your time too.
No, you're welcome. I really enjoyed it.
And Simon too, Simon Cooper of Weatherby's and the stud book. It's just so important, that horse technology, and good luck with pushing through the e-passports and getting rid of all that paper trail.
Thank you. I've thoroughly enjoyed it, and I've just noticed the sun's coming up where Aidan is. So
exactly, I've got to start work shortly.
I know. We're about to start whizzing past, as you said. And Anna, of course, from the Western Australian Off the Track program. Well done to you. Some great initiatives that you're undertaking there over in the west of Australia.
Thank you very much. An absolute privilege to be able to present today.
All right, thank you all. And thanks to you for watching this webinar, wherever you are around the world. The webinar, this one will be available just in the next couple of days on the IFAR website. And session 3, which is next Tuesday, April 20, we'll look at global insights on aftercare, hearing from some of the world's leading aftercare providers and equine charities. Session 4, Tuesday, April 27, looking at aftercare for racing industry participants, owners, breeders and trainers. Thanks again for your interest in this incredibly important issue of caring for our wonderful thoroughbreds right throughout their lives. I'm Caroline Searcy from here in Australia. It's good night.
you.